everyone, Sumo's Spiffy here. My March is done. Time to recap what they did and our predictions. Just roll 212. Okay, let's start the recap with our injured wrestlers, specifically the ones who missed matches along the way. Ono Sato. If you told me this would be the outcome before the Basho, I'd say that was the worst case scenario for Big Man. Watching it happen, I think it might have been even worse than that. Somehow, he was in even worse shape, which is not how injuries are supposed to go. And yeah, everyone else figured out what to do against him, but he didn't even look at the same level he was in January. Given that he did surprisingly well with the injury last Basho, I don't blame him for trying, but what a mess. He needs to take as much time as necessary to get it as healed as possible, and amazingly, the Yokozuna Deliberation Council straight up said that too. Hopefully that pushes the odds of it happening above, 0. Abi. I don't know what's going on anymore. Abi's strong January with a much different approach didn't convince me he could make it work at this much higher rank. But we never found out because he fractured a vertebra in practice and probably shouldn't have joined the Basho on day one. But the story really turned when the doctor's note said he only needed a week off for a fracture in his back, which led to his inevitable return. And he had a winning record the rest of the way. Adding to the mystery was that he seemed better able to use his regular attacking style than in the last couple tournaments. Not as well as we might remember, but better. I'll probably have more faith in him come May, so prepare for another 3-12. Onokatsu. Apparently the translation of Ono became from bad to broken this Basho. We came in wondering if Onokatsu had any chance of regaining the form that saw him be at least competitive at this level, and on the first day he injured his ankle. Which, for an ankle injury, that sure does look like he did it to his knee. Oh, and Nikon Sports said he was concussed when he fell too. So of course he was back on day 5. And the only thing that made it go less disastrously than you'd expect was his lone win via Oshoma hair pull. As understandable as his comeback was by sumo logic, that is, do whatever you can to avoid dropping a division, he'll be back in Juryo, and lucky if he doesn't regret the attempt to save his rank. Hakuno Fuji. At least Onokatsu's disaster started with the terrible luck of getting injured on day 1. Hakuno Fuji was known to be the walking wounded coming in. Like with Onokatsu, sumo logic makes his entry understandable, but finishing day 1 on the ground and dropping out on day 2 made the attempt look all the more foolish. Which made it even crazier that he was back on day 7. Sure, picking off Onokatsu in his first match helped, but he needed at least 3 wins to be sure he'd stay in the division. And Koto Shoho, who granted was on a hell of a roll, showed why that might be a tall task. But relying almost entirely on upper body strength, Hakuno Fuji finished the job with wins over Ichi Yamamoto and Ura the next 2 days. He could have dropped then, and maybe should have, but after 3 straight losses, he gave himself a little padding for May by beating Chura no Umi and Asaha Kuryu. If he does have a torn ligament in his foot, this will probably continue to hobble him, but he still looks like he'll be dangerous at a relatively low rank in May. Midori Fuji. For those who didn't catch the news, Midori dropped out of the Basho due to a heart condition. Fingers crossed he comes out of this healthy and whole. If he's able to continue his sumo career as well, so much the better. Hang on, shouldn't Wakataka Kage be here? I haven't forgotten him, just be patient. Okay, next up, the picks where all parties were in agreement on the prediction. Obviously, if we agree, we must have a pretty good idea of what's going on, right? Tobizaru. This one looked like it was gonna go all wrong. The bandages were off and Tobi was working his ass off, but he couldn't buy a win. The only reason he didn't start 0-6 was because he did Asanoyama super dirty and clung to the Tawara while Asanoyama stepped out due to trying to keep Tobi from falling. Slowly but surely though, he turned it around and made it to 6 wins. It's a pretty bad sign that he lost to both Chiyoshima and Mitakeumi in matchups where he normally wrecks face, but he'll at least stay in Makuuchi come May. Kirishima, the first of several picks where we all had the right idea but just didn't take it far enough. Kirishima came into March with what felt like an outside shot at Ozeki on the line. Turns out the JSA had a similar view. They expected a good performance here to set him up for potential promotion after May. But the 12 wins and, especially the Yusho, made it happen now. And part of their concern involved Kiri's injury history, so it turns out they do look at that. In any case, he got there, but here's my hot take on Kiri's performance. He wouldn't have pulled it off without the loss to Churinaumi. Churinaumi looked like the one free win on Kiri's docket, or as close as you can get to free. But he fought brilliantly and, at the time, seemed like he'd blown a hole in Kiri's Ozeki hopes. One loss couldn't do that on its own, but Kiri had far tougher matches coming up. He couldn't afford to drop this one. But Kiri came out of that fight on an absolute mission. No matter how good someone is or how long they've done what they do, getting taken down by someone who has no business beating them can be a hell of a wake-up call. It was the message he needed that no one could be overlooked and no less than 100% effort would achieve his goals. And from day 3 until he clinched the title, that's what we got. I can't speak for Ryan or the community, but I'll trade a slightly off prediction for an Ozeki-level Kirishima. No points for us though. Koto Sakura. Numerous people observed that Koto looked more nimble this basho, a relative statement if ever there was one, but they weren't wrong. That being said, this Koto wasn't that much of an upgrade from the one we expected to see. Even looking better than usual, he was a very normal 8-4 with 3 days to go, and Aonishiki, Hoshoryu, and Kirishima staring him down. Remarkably, the only one he lost to was busted up Aonishiki, and that took a Christmas miracle. Beating Hoshoryu and Kiri were, I think, his 2 best fights of the basho. If he can continue being more competitive against them, then maybe we should start to expect more from Koto on a regular basis. This time, those wins let him outplay all our expectations. Asahakuryu. I'm actually kind of mad about this one. This is the guy I expected to see in January before he nearly choked away his entire Makuuchi berth. Some of those losses were so dumpster fire bad that, even though I still felt he could be successful, my faith was dinged. We all expected a good performance, but a positive record no longer seemed inevitable. And then he told us to blow it out our asses. He fought so intelligently that, in retrospect, I can kinda understand how he went from struggling in January to smashing face here. When a big part of your game is doing the smart thing, and suddenly some of it stops working, you can question whether your plans are good enough. He didn't have that issue here. He found, for example, that he could swing guys around to maintain central ring position. When it didn't work against Ura, he took that loss in stride and kept bringing it to everyone else. Let's put it this way, he did so well, his loss to Hakuno Fuji on the end gives me a little more faith in Hakuno Fuji. That's pretty good. Though, not for our scores. Roga. This basho felt like Roga was so tired of the 7 and 8 meme that he was hellbent on breaking it, and when he had too many losses to do it positively, he just ran with the negative side. I couldn't see a clear sign of injury, though that's always possible, but it seems more like variance just worked against him. He had numerous matchups with opponents he's been reasonably successful against, and lost all of them. Getting his first win in 3 over Asanoyama was pretty good, but nothing else looked very impressive. Tamawashi, Oshoumi, and Oshoma were all clearly damaged, and Fujiryoga walked directly into Roga's grapple. All the same, I wouldn't take this as a sign he's doomed. Unless his May matchups are especially bad, I suspect he may return to his very middle ground form. Fuji no Kawa. We all expected a losing record out of Fuji, and I think we were very correct to do so. He squeaked out a Kachikoshi against Oho on the final day, in a match where even Oho looked amazed by what he can do. But he lucked into facing maybe the only version of Onosato he's likely to beat, and his uncalled false start against Hoshoryu was so severe, I'm working on a whole other video about those situations. Apart from the Kinboshi, his wins and losses were about what I'd have expected, at least if I knew Wakamoto Haru was so limited going in. Fuji's good fortune goes bad for us. Mitakeumi. Like Fuji no Kawa, we all expected Mitakeumi to hit the skids a bit. And after a nice win over Kinbozan, tumbling to 2-5 made it look like we'd all chosen wisely. But Mitakeumi actually looked strong for once, especially with that throw against Ura. In the end, he managed to pull enough fights with enough opponents doing a little bit worse and had his Kachikoshi wrapped up before Ichi Yamamoto laid a hand on him on the final day. He also made us look silly, but I know Yuri is happy about it. Tamawashi. Weep softly, Iron Man fans, for the rust has finally started to show. In retrospect, we should have seen his 5 and 10 in January as a sign, but how many times has he dropped rank and stabilized rather than continue to struggle? The most noteworthy injury news in recent months has revolved around his back. Maybe that was the issue, but his drop in mobility makes me think those perma-taped ankles were more of a factor. Let's see his likely opponents in May before writing his epitaph, but this version of Tamawashi is not long for the top division. Koto Shouho. Despite the fact none of us saw this coming, Koto Shouho's outstanding basho wasn't a total shock. Since 2022, he has a Makuuchi Yusho, 2 Makuuchi Jun Yoshos, and even 2 Juryo Yushos in the only 2 tournaments he spent down there. His upside is enormous. It's the other 80% of competitions where he's held back by his ankle and other injuries that leads to the expectation of mediocrity. And yet, this wasn't exactly Koto Yusho we saw. Not to bury the lead, but he was right in the middle of all the injured guys, not just getting a walkover against Onokatsu and wins against Abi, Hakuno Fuji, and Oshoma, but ranked high enough to also take advantage of Aonishiki. I'm not dismissing the 11 wins, he certainly fought better than I expected, but sometimes everything just comes together. The challenge is not letting it fall apart next time out. Chiyoshoma. When I made my Chiyoshoma prediction, in the back of my head it was like, this is exactly the time for him to surprise everyone. But there's lots of times where it's just the time for him to surprise everyone, and it doesn't always happen. And surprise is the critical word here. Even though we all got this pick badly wrong, it would have been madness to expect 10 wins out of the Henka King. I mean, he was 1 in 12 lifetime against Tobizaru and even lost to this busted ass version of him in January, but he found that win. Going into the final day, he was 2 in 10 against Ura. Both wins were a little over a year ago when he made that career-bending run to Maegashira 2. So, given the streak he was on, nabbing that 3rd win wasn't a total surprise, but who expected them to be heading in such opposite directions? Much like Kota Shoho, his performance was definitely better than expected, but he was also deeply fortunate to get the worst versions of Roga and Oshoumi. I have a little more hope for him continuing to succeed than Kota Shoho, but that particular bar is in the 5th circle of hell, as is my ego. Oh god, this video's this long and we're only a third of the way in? Well, the next section is blessedly short, the wrestlers where we made different picks, but they landed in all our predicted win ranges.
Hooray!
Wakataka Kage. I had a little more hope for Waka Prime than Ryan or the community, but if I'd known about his elbow before I made my pick, I probably would have been right there with him. But he was pretty much as expected, strong if not 100%. None of his wins were surprising unless you count the freebie over Onosato on day 1. Losing to this bigger, better, faster, alright, not faster, but definitely stronger version of Atami wasn't a shock by the time their match happened. Even Chura no Umi's win wasn't too stunning given what he'd already done to Aonishiki and Kirishima. All of it added up to 8 wins and another Komusubi berth, so everyone scores. And I'm leaving these points on the board despite his injury because gods know we need the damn things. Oho. For the first half of the Basho, it looked like Oho was going to blow out even our worst expectations. The new Torakumi system left him with a significantly easier early schedule than anticipated, and he was still only 1 in 4 when the Sanyaku arrived on his doorstep. Aonishiki's downturn and Onokatsu's existence let him split the next 4 days, but he was still only 3 in 6 with the rest of the mostly competent Sanyaku waiting their turn. But Papa Bear was already too battered to put up a fight, Wakadu continued his role as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest, and even Atami Plus couldn't get the better of him. Somehow, despite not having an easier schedule to take advantage of at the end, Oho still turned his personal shit show into another 7-8 record. This f***ing guy. Give us our points and get out. Hirata Umi. Unlike Oho, Hirata Umi took full advantage of the new schedule, running up a 4-1 record before reality took hold. Even with a stunning blowout of Koto Zakura and a relatively good 3-4 record against the Sanyaku, Yoshi and Fujinokawa finished off any hopes he had of a winning record. It was a pretty good basho overall, and it looks like he'll hold rank. But if you're a Hirata Umi fan, is this really what you want as a best case scenario? Next up, the hellscape of wrongness. Aonishiki. Do you want to talk about this? Cause I don't want to talk about this. Okay, I guess I gotta say something about the most popular wrestler in the sport. This was terrible. Rumor has it Aonishiki was dealing with a toe injury, which would go some way towards explaining his inability to push in on so many opponents. But his opponents were also clearly aware of the new anti-Aonishiki meta. Get your arms under his and pull up so he can't get to your belt. When he could get to the belt, he was still a dominant force, but rather than the norm, that was very much the minority of his fights. This is a case where his practice record between now and May might be quite meaningful. For now, bad for him, bad for us, bad for everyone. Fujiryoga. If you read our community posts during the basho, you already saw what I'm about to say. Fujiryoga is currently hopeless on the belt. or helpless? Both, really. Look at this. Look how long he's standing there, not even trying to do anything. Move, man, move! It looks like he'll hold his spot in Makuuchi for May, but Coach Fujishima better teach him some belt moves if he doesn't want his charge to get embarrassed again. He should be much better than this. Wakamoto Haru. Between the bandage on Waka's leg blending in well and Abima's coverage not exactly being in 4K HD, I didn't see it until it was pointed out. After that, his struggles made sense. Ryan was a little more pessimistic about him than the rest of us, but no one counted on this disaster. Gonoyama. Like with Asahakuryu, we knew Gonoyama should do well at this rank, but we absolutely did not expect Blowout Gono to re-emerge. Maybe he's accepted that this is who he is, and he may as well 100% be that guy against a middling level of opposition. Maybe I was right about him being off-kilter physically and now he's healthy again. Regardless, he'll be back in range of the Sanyaku, and they give no reason to think they won't continue beating his ass sideways. But this one was fun to watch, even if he outstripped our best hopes for him. Nishiki Fuji. There's blessedly little to say about Nishiki Fuji. 9-6 is exactly what I'd expect from him when healthy, but nobody thought that was the case after his injury departure in January. Turns out Team Izagahama handled his situation brilliantly. He left that Basha with enough wins to stay in the division and looked pretty close to full strength here. Sometimes it just be that way. Alright, let me share some statistics before this f***ing buzzer gives me PTSD. During the Basho, I said it seemed like guys with very disparate records were getting matched up a lot more than usual. Afterwards, I ran the numbers and found out it was pretty true. Back in November, over the last 5 days, in matches between wrestlers ranked 4 or below, there were 32 where they had the same record or only 1 win difference. 12 were between guys with a gap of 3 or more wins. This was even more prevalent in January. 41 matches happened with a 0 or 1 win gap, only 7 had a difference of 3 or more. This is pretty normal. In March, though, it was 24 matches with a 0 or 1 win gap and 17 with 3 or more. That's a huge difference. It's not wrong per se. When the gap is big, it's usually between a higher rank with a bad record and a lower rank with a good one. There's a logic to that. And it's also a matter of circumstance to a degree. The lower ranked guys kept winning, which kept creating bigger gaps between them and the struggling mid-rankers. There were more matching record fights that could have been made to limit this, but since that wasn't done, more of these big splits became inevitable near the end. So, if you're wondering why so-and-so did so poorly or so well, this may help explain it. Alright, back to the fail list. Ura! Everyone felt pretty good about Ura's chances this Basho, and why wouldn't we? He didn't look like anything was wrong in January, just he was outmatched. Dropping to rank 8, his schedule would be substantially different, and he'd likely see 3 of the 4 guys he beat last Basho. His 3-0 start only lent credence to this positive outlook. And then, disaster. Daisha was always tough for him, and Tamawashi's a coin flip, so dropping to 3-2 wasn't that bad. But the rest of his schedule was insane. Over the last 10 days, he faced exactly 1 wrestler, Roga, who fought the whole Basho and finished with a losing record. Matakeyumi is the only one who finished with as few as 8 wins. Everyone else was at 9 and up. Momentum is a real factor in a sport where matches end as quickly as in sumo. Being a half step faster because you're confident everything will work, or a half step slow because you're not, or slightly dinged up, can change a lot. So getting stuck against a string of winning wrestlers over the last several days, even as his record got worse and worse, turned a problem into a complete mess. All that being said, momentum isn't likely to swing a matchup with a significant skill gap between the wrestlers, so all these guys are still capable of taking down Pinky Boy. But this was very much a worst case scenario, and I'm not going to be worried about Ura unless it happens again. Still, this sucked to watch. Oshoumi. Another 2-8 start, but not another 7-8 finish. The schedule did him no favors either, but the biggest issue is that his legs were taped up, not his arm. The arm was at least a known problem, and we felt positively about him because the arm was definitely good in January. If his whole body is injury prone, he's liable to end up as another of sumo's what-if stories. Fuji Seiyun. I was very slightly pessimistic about Fuji's chances this Basho on the basis that he had numerous poor matchups awaiting him and few definitively good ones. But even my broader statement that he was a 6 to 9 win guy ended up being wrong. The only one of those bad matchups he lost was to Nishiki Fuji. I would have loved to see him against Gonoyama, but the powers that be decided otherwise. On the plus side, we can't say finishing with Oshoma and Shishi carried him to 10 wins because Oshoma beat him. I don't know how he'll do at rank 6 in May if I'm right about where he ends up, but he sure looks like a division regular, maybe more than any of us expected. Kinbozan. The community was super split on Kinbozan. The livestream vote that shoved him down to D tier was surprising, but in fairness, everyone leaned more towards wounded or uninterested Kinbozan showing up rather than the competent version. His opening match against Fuji Ryoga suggested otherwise. Dropping from 4-2 to 4-5, however, was evidence that we were still probably correct not to expect the world of him. But he put in the work over the next several matches, snagging his Kachikoshi on day 13. After Asakoryu put him at 8-6, the scheduling committee decided on Roga as his final opponent. Yet another head-scratching matchup put him at 9 wins and triggered another Toki Hayate. Ryan's dark horse of the Basho looked like he got kicked by one. He was 4-4 through 8 days and 5-6 after 11, so even though things were never great, they were mostly not bad either. But Asahi Kuryu and Chio Shoma really put the nails in his coffin, and Fuji Ryoga's half miracle on the final day left Toki with a raggedy 5-10. Cross your fingers, Time Storm fans, that tanking back into solid double digits makes him more competitive. And now, the 1/3 of the Banzuke where some of us made a correct prediction. If it looks like we're going to end up with disastrous final scores, you have done the math correctly. Hoshoryu. The prodigal nephew did fine, but as Chairman Hakaku let it be known, fine is not sufficient for a Yokozuna. I said my piece about the Fujinokawa match, but let's be honest, the Daisho loss is the one where there's no excuse. He just can't get through a whole Basho without getting played like this in some fashion, and it did in Ryan's 12+ win prediction. But I did enjoy the Yokozuna Deliberation Council sticking up for him and essentially telling Hikaku to go take a walk. Takayasu. For a week, Papa Bear looked like he'd be one of the guys to overshoot our positive predictions. He got up slowly after the loss to Kirishima, but that was an epic battle, so fatigue was an obvious explanation. Everything went wrong after that though. Only his last-ditch effort against Tatami the final day saved his Sanyaku spot and 2 of our picks alongside it. Atami Fuji. Okay, I was all wrong here. For as much sumo as I watch, as much as I break it down, I seem to have a major failing in figuring out when someone has turned a corner after a strong performance and when they're going to fall apart again. What we saw from Atami in January, I attributed to the capability he's always had when he's feeling good. Turns out he's actually gotten better and I didn't recognize it as such. And I say that despite the fact 3 of his wins were over Onosato, Wakamoto Haru, and Aonishiki, all of whom would normally blast him at anything close to full strength. Wakataka Kage may have had a bad elbow, but Atami looked great in that fight. He beat Kotozakura with authority, and he didn't give away matches against Gonoyama and Kotoshoho, which he might have done in the past to guys riding such major hot streaks. Finishing 9-6 even with those injury-impacted wins puts him, I think, in more of a healthy Wakamoto Haru range. That is, if he maintains this level, he'll still probably float in and out of the Sanyaku, depending on the health and capability of his opponents. But that's a hell of a lot better than where he was 6 months ago. Ryan and the community shamed me on this pick. Yoshino Fuji. As badly as the predictions went overall, Yoshi made me feel like a prophet. I said he's going to slip up sooner rather than later, and that's exactly what happened. Even if you'd give him the advantage over a healthy Onosato, he hasn't lost to the guy, remember? He still had Wakamoto Haru's bad leg to thank for even reaching 7 wins. Until he's able to turn around some of his negative matchups, he'll be a tricky guy to predict. Shurinaumi. Most wrestlers have a style that they want to use. Even if they fight defensively, they're working towards their preferred approach. Some others use what's called negative sumo, going backwards all the time. Against the top guys in this Basho, Shura never went for a particular attack, but he also didn't go backwards. He just defended very actively until he found an opening. And it worked brilliantly, until it didn't. If I'd known he was going to get through the Yokozuna, Ozeki, Sekiwake, and Waka Prime at 3 and 4, I would have assumed at least 6 wins total, but he just couldn't keep it rolling. Wounded Oshoma was his only other victim, leaving Ryan and I with the points here. Daisho. Once again, the question was mostly about gauging how bad Daisho's leg still is. Looks like it's worse than any of us anticipated. He hadn't lost to Takano Sho since 2023, only lost to Shodai once since 2023, and also beat Shodai in his first basho back from injury. Not only did he lose both those fights, he wasn't all that competitive in them. Despite a Kinboshi and a win over one wounded Waka, the other Waka's dropout on day 14 might be the only reason he hit 7 wins. Ryan's optimism goes unrewarded, the community and I luck out. Takano Sho. I haven't spoken with Ryan, so I don't know why he was higher on Takano Sho's chances than the rest of us, but I'm pretty sure even he didn't expect a 7-1 start. What's noteworthy is that, looking at the schedule now, Takano Sho having a good first week isn't surprising, it's just the degree of that success. Like I said, Daisho had dominated their matchup. Hiradoumi beat him 3 straight going in. Aonishiki hadn't lost to him despite pushers being as close to kryptonite for him as we'd seen. Putting all those wins together, plus all the ones we expected, made for a hell of a show. Once Hoshoryu, Kirishima, and Kotozakura came calling, any early Yusho dreams got tanked. Taking advantage of his veteran experience against Fuji Seiyun and Takayasu's injury made it look like he was going to outrun everyone's predictions. Somehow, Wakamoto Haru kept that from happening and snagged Ryan a score. Ichi Yamamoto. Only I got this one wrong, and I don't feel bad about it at all. One thing that's very hard to predict is a guy's first 2 opponents dropping out with injury immediately after fighting him. Yeah, Onokatsu got hurt while losing that fight, but Abi's previously unknown injury was clearly at maximum problem status. Even then, from 4 and 5, he beat 3 guys he usually struggles against, then somehow ended up with Matakayumi on the final day to hit 9 wins. That's a really good record for him, all things considered. If I'd known his whole schedule before the basho and who was injured, I still might not have upgraded my prediction. Good on Ryan and the community for having sufficient faith. Oshoma. Oshoma started January 5-0 before cratering to 7-8. There was no apparent reason, he just started to suck. Maybe I wasn't looking closely enough, or maybe things got worse, but this time I noticed him moving very gingerly at the end of fights. It didn't matter if anything actually happened to hurt him, and that was the most alarming part. I couldn't get a handle on which leg was the problem. For all I know, it was both. So he's still someone who should succeed in the mid-ranks, but once again, the community benefits from sipping that haterade. Shodai. I initially thought we all got this right because I thought Shodai finished 7-8. That's full-on Dark Lord energy. Even when he wins, you don't know if he wins. His 6-3 start had a pretty strong whiff of bullshit considering he had 2 walkovers, but kicking Kotoshoho down to 8-2 made it look like he'd wind up with a pretty good basho. Then all the winning wrestlers from further down the ranks came calling and he just couldn't do it. It was so bad that final win over Daisho made me think Daisho is in far worse shape than previously believed. By any reasonable standard, we all nailed this prediction, but Ryan's luck turned bad. Shishi. Well, I'm glad I didn't pull the trigger on a kinder prediction because this was messy. I said in the tier list video, Shishi is a wrestler who has his big tournaments when he gets in a flow. If his early schedule doesn't let him find his footing, it'll be tougher sledding. Lo and behold, he didn't do badly, but he also couldn't get himself in gear. Taking down Oshoumi and Tamawashi for his first 2 wins looked fine, sure. As we discovered though, they weren't the challenges we expected. Neither was Oshoma. Losing to Reborn Asakoryu and chaos-minded Chiyoshoma in normally good matchups probably didn't help his flow either. And so, 6-6, Shishi dropped to 6-9 with losses to opponents he'd previously been a combined 9-1 against. Ew, 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 ew. Bad time for Shishi fans, of whom the community has many. Asakoryu. If Atami Fuji is the albatross around my neck, Asakoryu is the angry pigeon. The core of my doubts in both cases was the question of whether January was a one-time improvement. Truth be told though, I feel dumber about Asakoryu. Atami's issue had always been one of putting everything together, so wondering if that would continue made sense. Asakoryu just fought differently and more effectively, and wondering if he'd continue to do what worked feels pretty stupid now. That being said, there was a detail I missed from January, his new Tachi-Ai. This cross-arm thing started then, but I didn't notice it until this basho. Superficially, it seems like a style choice, and maybe a bad one. After all, his hand has farther to move, so it should be a slower Tachi-Ai, right? But I think it genuinely helps. Look at the Shodai match. Shodai's reaction is slow to the point that I'm not sure he saw the hand move as clearly as he would with a normal straight down hand movement. Plus, it led to false starts that I'm not sure would be called with a more standard tachi, which tells me it's throwing off the gyoji as well. The main difference is the force he's bringing, of course. A tachi twist isn't going to help that much, but in a sport with such thin margins between victory and defeat, every little bit helps, to my chagrin. Asanoyama. The main difference between Asanoyama losing his final 3 matches in January and in March is that in January, there was a visible degradation in his movement. This time, it's probably too harsh to say his brain shut off, but I don't know what he was doing. He's so good on the belt, but somehow he got beaten to it by Kinbozan and was overwhelmed by Yoshino Fuji's power to the point he was just hanging on and never grabbed it. If he did anything really brain dead though, it was leaving his arms in against Abi and committing to it so fully he couldn't react in time to swing an arm out and even attempt a grab. I mean, if he's not rushing up the ranks, I guess feeling a little more freedom with 8 wins makes sense, but it sure sucked for Ryan and I. And finally, Kotoeho. Despite my prediction, I said in the tier list vid that he'd put up a good fight. I set him at losing record level because someone had to go there, and there were so many difficult looking matchups, he seemed like a safe option. But I thought a notch higher was reasonable. Ryan went beyond that and wound up looking like a genius. Kotoeho's 3 worst matchups coming in were Asakoryu, Shishi, and Oshoumi. Beating Asakoryu for the first time in 4 was very impressive, doing the same to Shishi at the end of the basho, maybe a little less so. He didn't fight Oshoumi, but given their paths through the tournament, that seemed like a suddenly winnable matchup as well. He fought several struggling wrestlers near the end, which makes me unsure what to think. Is it even more impressive that he had 9 wins despite losing to Tobizaru and Tamawashi? Or was his inability to beat them a sign he's still not ready to routinely win in Makuuchi? That's gonna take some thought. All I know is Ryan scores the final point of our competition. And that's the recap for March 2026. A little frustrating on the prediction front, but that's why sometimes you want a few drinks handy, right? I just need to make sure I record the intro before they really kick in. As for Spiffy vs. the World, it didn't go well for anyone. But incredibly, it went a little less bad for the community. Thanks to Ryan from Grand Sumo Breakdown for playing our game, and congratulations to the Hive Mind for squeaking it out in the end. So here's how we'll do the charity pick. If there's a charity you'd like to see win this donation, leave it in a comment. If you like the charity someone else picked, upvote it. 2 days after this video goes up, I'll take the charities with the 4 highest upvote totals and make a poll on the community page. The winner of the poll gets my money. As I mentioned earlier, I'm working on a video about some of these crazy uncalled false starts. I know we just touched on the topic, but I did this as a challenge to see if I could finally keep a video under 10 minutes, still figuring out if I'll manage it. A handful of people also suggested a breakdown of Aonishiki's struggles, so I'll give that a whack too. Other than that, have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Okay, time to record the intro. Oh man, I feel like I need a nap first.